Hey, everybody, it's David from the Lorehounds here. Just dropping in ahead of the podcast proper here, just to provide a little context and set up. This was a joint project that we did with Ayehsa from the Every Single Sci-Fi Film Ever podcast. This is a little bit more of Ayesha's format, bringing on a couple of academics and then going through a little bit more of a structured conversation. And this is part of our big joint project that we've done with Ayehsa to cover aliens. We've got the new movie Alien Romulus, which is coming out on the 16th. And then we, of course, have the 45th anniversary of the movie. So we've got a trailer reaction for Romulus. We have a conversation about Alien 1979, and that's with Ayehsa and Elisha and myself. And we have this podcast, and then we'll have a movie review once Romulus comes out. And then for subscribers, of course, we have some bonus material where I break down the trailers in detail. Anyway, be sure to check out Every Single Sci-Fi Film Ever. It's an amazing podcast. Ayehsa is great. We're really happy to know her and to be working on a few projects here and there with her. Other than that, here comes the episode.
Hello and welcome to this special crossover episode. To learn more about the crossover, which has multiple podcasts, you can head on over to the show notes. I'm Ayehsa from the Every Single Sci-Fi Film Ever podcast.
And I'm David from the Lorehounds podcast. Today, Ayehsa and I are going to be speaking about the 1979 film Alien with some fantastic guests. Alien was directed by Ridley Scott, who was at the time a relatively new director.
And the film has gone on to spawn a huge franchise, which includes the very recently released Alien Romulus.
There have been at least 2 crossover movies with the Predator franchise, as well as a myriad of short films, video games, books, articles, and even academic essays on the film that have all cemented its reputation as one of the science fiction films with the longest lasting legacies. All of this despite the original film receiving very lukewarm reviews during its initial release. Vincent Canby of the New York Times warned us not to race to Alien expecting the wit of Star Wars or the metaphysical pretensions of 2001: A Space Odyssey and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that it provided shocks of a most mundane kind. Roger Ebert described it as basically just an intergalactic haunted house thriller.
And Derek Malcolm wrote in The Guardian that it would amaze, but with a story that is basically just a mixture of the creature from the Black Lagoon and the thing from outer space, and that Ridley Scott's combination of space fiction and horror story is no great shakes as a work of art. Artifice, however, it has in profusion. And with that, on to our wonderful guests. Roger Luckhurst is a professor at Birkbeck University of London. He specialises in literature, film, and cultural history from the 19th-century period to the present. He has written numerous number of articles and books, including the BFI classic book on Alien. Welcome back to the show, Roger. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. This is a very exciting crossover. I'm really looking forward to this.
We also have Jason Eberle, who is a professor of healthcare ethics at St. Louis University with special interest in biotechnology, human enhancement, and the philosophy of human nature. He has also written extensively, including a range of books that examine the philosophy of various mainstream media, such as Star Wars, Star Trek, and Battlestar Galactica. Welcome to the show, Jason. How are you doing?
Good. David, Ayehsa, Roger, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Great. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you all for being here. This is a lot of fun. It's good to see this come to fruition. I see on social medias that Alien Month is trending as one of the hashtags. So everybody's getting excited for this new film.
Yeah, I just saw the trailer yesterday. I went to go see Deadpool and Wolverine. And yeah, the trailer looked really, really awesome.
Yeah, and I've just got my invitation for the gala in the UK on the 14th of August, I think. So I'm really looking forward to see what they do with that.
No spoilers.
Yeah, which we're just going to explain that because this podcast will be coming out after the release, this has already happened, all of it. Okay, so can we start off with a quote from Dan O'Bannon, who was the writer of Alien? He said, "I don't steal from anybody. I steal from everybody. Roger, can you talk a bit about the origins of this story?
Yeah, Dan O'Bannon is someone who came through with people like John Carpenter. So he was very involved in John Carpenter's student film Dark Star. In fact, he had a long-term grudge against Carpenter for not getting a co-directing credit. He had grudges with everyone, though, so that's okay. And he said quite openly that Alien was about really throwing together lots of different kind of influences. So I think, as you've mentioned from those early reviews, The Thing is an obvious kind of reference point here. It came from outer space. He was a very kind of well-read science fiction fan, so quite a lot of the material here echoes stories by Van Vogt, who was a classic 30s hard science fiction writer, who in fact sued them quite successfully, I think, for borrowing some of his ideas from his novel Space Beagle. And there are a whole load of kind of films from the 60s and 70s, really quite pulpy ones that Dan O'Bannon was just clearly an expert in. So he kind of borrowed from, you know, the space vampires and all these kinds of stuff that were floating around. And you can see lots and lots of influences all kind of hurled together into one mix. And so his script, which was brilliantly called Space Beast, was part of the kind of early elements of this. And then, of course, that got reworked by other people involved in the project.
Yeah, and I think we can't underestimate his the effect of him participating with Jodorowsky's Dune, but also as well as the Dark Star. Coming out of Dark Star, I believe he was very motivated because of whatever reasons, but he really wanted to use those experiences to help inform the screenplay that he wrote with Shusett.
Yeah, that's right. So he'd been hired by Jodorowsky, the lunatic Mexican Peruvian, to kind of do this kind of Dune thing, which was this massive project, was going to cost millions and millions and millions. Pink Floyd were going to be hired to do, you know, the music for this and that, and Salvador Dali was going to be in it, and so was Mick Jagger. You know, it was all very kind of crazy, but he was involved and built a design team for Dune, which was amazing in Paris. He was there for quite a few months, and when that collapsed, he actually brought together that design team back once his script had been picked up. But yes, he went home to America and stayed on the sofa of his friend Ron Suchet. And I love the detail that he had, you know, terrible kind of stomach problems, and he had Crohn's disease in the end, but he was kind of agonized by stomach problems. That seems to go straight into the script of Alien, doesn't it? Of this kind of sense of something inside you that's kind of eating at you. And it feels really sort of powerful for that. So Dan O'Bannon's crucial for this, even though he had to fight like hell to get his name anywhere near the credits in the end for Alien.
Dan O'Bannon and his stomach bug are both very important to this.
They really are.
So although it had lukewarm reviews, what do you think makes Alien stand out from other films of this era and this genre?
Oh, well, to me, I think it's undoubtedly horror films work when they have an iconic moment that is so profoundly traumatic that in a sense it shudders through the whole culture. So that sort of chest-bursting scene was completely unprecedented, I think. And, you know, it has a whole mythology around it, whether the actors themselves knew what was just about to happen, whether they had an authentic kind of, you know, horrified response. But there's something so spectacular about that. And that's what Walter Hill, the producer, said was, I've just read this terrible script called Space Beast, but it's got one fantastic scene. So this sort of sense of that kind of element. And really the whole of the franchise, I think, is all about trying to recover that moment and try and repeat that kind of cultural shock, which of course you can't do. But nevertheless, it's a kind of sense of this is the thing that kind of burst through into a kind of collective unconscious almost. So that's nothing you can predict. I mean, you can't predict that Sadako with her long hair crawling out of a television is going to have such a profound effect. But nevertheless, that was also one of those cultural kind of shock moments.
Which is from Ringu, right?
Which is from Ringu, yeah. And again, you know, creates a sort of franchise. And that sort of sense of these moments of traumatic shock, for me, I think, are the kind of crucial reasons why Alien follows through, but it's not necessarily a predictable kind of moment, but nevertheless, fantastic.
Jason, what kind of influence or impact did this film have on you when you first saw it?
I didn't see it when it first came out. I was a little young at that point. But when I saw it either in middle school, high school, I was already a huge sci-fi fan of Star Wars, Star Trek, also the sort of 80s horror genres, Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, all that. And so right away, Alien spoke to me as this wonderful amalgamation of sci-fi and horror. And I think in terms of sort of the breakthrough message, beyond just the visuals and so on, is this idea that, as the tagline famously says, in space, no one can hear you scream, right? That there is, with Star Trek, you had this positive vision of the future. Star Wars is this, space Western where the heroes win in the end. And this is just completely upends all the sort of sci-fi tropes that we had inherited, especially those of us growing up in the late 70s and the 80s. So that's kind of the impact on me, is like, oh, this is, completely different. And then, of course, the franchise sort of has evolved from that point. But yeah, Alien's still my favorite.
I think that's a really great segue into talking about the grittiness of this film, where we had a very clean look from 2001 Space Odyssey, also in Star Wars. But then in Star Wars, we had heroes on a journey, and there's quests and nobility. And yet in this film, it's sweaty, it's gritty, it's management, it's labor, it's a space tug pulling a refinery. So I think that's one of the interesting things, is how we could see ourselves on the screen. I don't know, Roger, have you looked into, or what are your thoughts around the fact that in the late 70s, we were really struggling, both in the UK and the United States, with labor issues and corporate control, and there was a lot going on. So how do you see the relationship between the film and who we as an audience were at that time, and the ability to see ourselves on screen?
Yeah, that is so right about the grittiness of it. And I think that's what's kind of quite radical. And really, this is the vision that Dan O'Bannon had in Dark Star as well. This is kind of astronauts who are just utterly bored in space, and they're just kind of, practicing they're firing their lasers at objects because they're bored. They are setting fire to things. They're really grumpy. They're cross. Don't give me any philosophical nonsense. Just give me a planet to blow up. That famous kind of line from that. And it's carried straight through into something like Alien. So just the year before, as you say, Star Wars is shiny and bright, and Star Trek also very fetishistic, shiny, lovely USS Enterprise. And here we have a very grimy Nostromo that you wander around these quite grubby.
It's a pickup truck
corridors. Yeah, it's a pickup truck, and it's also, the set is built out of old World War II materials that they just took from nearby dumps. That sort of sense of a real kind of griminess of it. And what that immediately kind of leads into, once the crew are reawakened by this distress signal, is a sense of just like no hierarchy, cross people. Parker and Brett stand for the kind of workers who are saying, what about our bonus? Why have we been woken up? Are we going to get paid for this? How do we, I don't respect the captain. Captain has no authority on this ship at all. And all the way through the franchise, that's consistent, is that, the captains never have authority. And it is exactly ground into this kind of late 70s moment. I mean, in the UK, where Ridley Scott was filming this in Shepperton, just outside London, there were constant strikes actually on sets of films that were being made around there as well. Yeah, absolutely. It was made just before the winter of discontent, as it's called in England. So this is the winter of 1978-79, when there was a final sense of, labour unions really having the whip hand over the government. They'd already defeated one government in 1974 by stopping any coal being produced. So we had a 3-day week, so-called, and lots of scheduled power cuts. I remember that as a child. It's all very exciting with your candles in the early 70s. So that sort of sense of a real kind of, crisis. And famously, this is still much debated politically, its significance. But in the winter of discontent, even the dead couldn't be buried because there was this kind of strike of council working undertakers. And that's the atmosphere in which the film is made. And it's also the atmosphere in which both Alien and actually James Cameron's Aliens was made, because James Cameron, being quite hawkish, was totally appalled coming to Britain and discovering that the unions had such power on sets. And he was so cross about tea breaks. Everyone just stopped and had tea breaks. And he famously said that he bought the entire tea trolley in order to stop people kind of taking breaks from work. So there's a whole element of a kind of union kind of anger and frustration in the film as well. And then just one detail, I think it's really important to realise that Yaphet Kotto, who plays Parker, had just come out of Paul Schrader's brilliant film Blue Collar. And that is precisely about auto workers in the States. It's about, kind of union conspiracies, the attempt to try and kind of rob their own union in order to get money because they're so poorly paid. All of that stuff. Yaphet Kotto is carrying that through into the film as well. So I think it is kind of riven with all of these union details.
Jason, I think we're mostly contemporaries, you and I, so we probably remember coming out of the 70s and going into the 80s, especially with auto manufacturing. That's really when, especially the Japanese auto industry, started to dominate in the United States. And so then we have this element of corporate control that is very far removed. And maybe a plant manager, hey, I'm just a plant manager, being Dallas, and then the line workers being Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto, who are complaining about their bonuses and stuff. How do you remember that time period in terms of labor relations and what was going on in the United States? Because it was filmed in England, but the big market at the time, before a global market, was for American audiences.
Yeah, no, I think that part of even though, again, it's pointed out, at the get-go, the critical reviews of the film, weren't that hot when it first came out, but clearly,
No, right.
but it clearly had, a resonance with audiences, built up over time such that we could get something like James Cameron's Aliens, financed and produced. And so, yeah, I do think that a big, resonant factor with audiences was just that they could see themselves in these characters. Yeah, these weren't, again, the larger than life space opera folks that, who are in Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker is almost a mythical figure, something that they kind of turn on its head when they get to The Last Jedi. And Gene Roddenberry famously, with Star Trek, wanted all the characters represent the best of humanity, the sort of almost sanitized, can you really see yourselves, in these folks? They're the best of the best. Well, we don't feel that way. And then certainly, people who are, working, what we would call, blue collar jobs, who are just, trying to eke out a living, trying to survive. Yeah, they can identify so much more with, these types of characters. And again, that notion of distance, of control, of having your fate being determined by others. When Brett and Parker are saying, look, we're not going to get, we need bonus pay to do this. And Ash basically, reminds them of their contract they signed, which, like the rest of us, no one ever really reads, right? They probably just sign, they saw the dollar figures and sign, okay, I'm going to do it. It's like, oh, by the way, if this happens, you got to do it, or total forfeiture of your shares. And again, that's very real. That's very grounded. That's, not at all science fictional, right? That's just real life. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that the film was so resonant, because American workers were experiencing that as the economy started to shift to a global, multinational economy versus just, you work at the same plant where your father worked and whatever, and and who the boss is, and you have them over for dinner, and that's those days are starting to disappear by that point, and now they're long gone.
That really commingles with the horror element, right? Because we have this monster, but then we have who's the real monster, the corporation. But then I think that's the background for our hero or heroine to emerge.
The female hero, it was apparently written as unisex, so they could have gone either way. But for myself growing up, it was like a really significant character. And to have someone as a female who isn't particularly coded female, except for those last few scenes. She could easily be male, and that makes it so different because she's not expected to act in any feminine ways. What kind of effect did that have, both on cinema or on you personally when you saw the film?
I'm going to go first. Again, growing up with Star Wars, right? You have Princess Leia, but even though she's tough and shoots the grate off the garbage chute, someone has to rescue our skins. But of course, she's also a princess and is dressed in sort of virginal white. And famously, George Lucas wanted Carrie Fisher's, breasts not to be sort of standing out. And then you sort of have the hypersexualization, in Return of the Jedi. And so, Ripley, as you said, except for those sort of last, few scenes where she's, stripped down to her skivvies, pretty much, the character could be a man or woman. And, Sigourney Weaver, plays the character, in this way that it sort of blinds you to gender differences. And, that's obviously a huge topic today of what gender means and relationship of sex and gender and so on. And I guess to me, I like seeing a character, I like to see female characters both who sort of show strength within the context of their feminine identity, and also those for whom their feminine identity is a total non-player for who they are as a character. I think we need both represented in cinema.
It's interesting also as how she's set up in the film, because we don't know that she's the protagonist. Why do you think they made that choice?
Oh, well, I also think, just to kind of jump in, I also think that that's a very brilliant device, actually, because it's misdirection. The first kind of 10 or 15 minutes of this, you actually don't know who the kind of central protagonist is going to be. And that's also part of the gender blindness of it, I think. So maybe it's going to be Kane, but he gets killed off quite early. Sorry to ruin it. And he also, the captain isn't going to be the kind of heroic figure. And it's only slowly that someone like Sigourney Weaver, who's kind of middle management actually, is slowly kind of emerging. And that is I do think it's a really kind of revolutionary decision, even if they're not, card-carrying feminists here who are making this film. There's a kind of sense in which, okay, so we'll make this gender blind, but then also the decisions that are made through this mean that it's overturning this sense of the damsel in distress, which is what so many kind of space opera narratives are. It's what drives something like Star Wars, as we were saying. So that's a sense of, the rescuing of the very passive kind of female figure. And here instead, you've got someone who's emerging as a very kind of androgynous, not gender coded at all. And then I think crucially, this is to go back to before Alien came out. There's a trick about the death of the Captain Dallas, which you don't actually see him die. And what you're expecting, because this is the genre convention, is that he will come back at the end and rescue the damsel in distress. It's got to be a man at the end who's going to come back and rescue. And Alien refuses to do that. It's all on Ripley's own terms, even down to, the very end, even when she is sexualized by the end. There is this sort of sense of, well, she's still carrying a harpoon. She still has the kind of sense of this kind of phallic power about her. And they just sort of, this all comes, I think, about partially accidentally, but they really run with it for the rest of the series because they realize they've discovered something. And the way that women spectators write about the film, and different kinds of spectators, so lots of lesbian theorists and so on have sort of said this is an amazing moment when you have a non-gendered kind of heroine who isn't necessarily gay or straight, doesn't really matter. It's more about the fact that she's not coded in any kind of way that makes it so revolutionary. So I think it's really important to get back to that kind of moment of just the kind of sheer excitement of doing something different with that character.
There's a scene that I believe is deleted, or maybe in one of the various iterations. I just recently watched the director's cut, which also had some interesting things, but this scene wasn't in it, where Ripley encounters Dallas cocooned in the alien hive material. And now that you've just said what you said, that's really fascinating, because by removing that scene, we change the entire dynamic of the film. and we're left questioning our own assumptions about what's supposed to happen, what's supposed, quote unquote, supposed to happen versus what really does. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts about, or have any back information about that scene, about why it was cut?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there are two scenes that are cut with Dallas, and one of them is a sex scene with Dallas and Ripley, which is fantastically, fantastically important to cut out.
Yes.
And Ridley Scott said it was one of his favorite scenes, but actually he understood that he had to cut that out, because that does completely undermine her kind of her iconic power, actually, and she does become a kind of bit part in somebody else's story. So there's that, and then there's also, as you say, this kind of scene where Dallas is finally found, and we understand something about him being turned into this kind of egg shape. So we understand a little bit more about the life cycle of the alien, and then that also clipped out. He makes sometimes the decision to put it back into director's cuts, sometimes takes it out again, the way that he does with the endless versions of films that he puts out. But I think it's quite a good kind of, again, another edit, another occlusion, which leaves the kind of potential cliffhanger of the end much more kind of powerful. And it's also part of the brilliance of the film, I think, is it's just its leanness and its kind of forward thrust of the narrative. So everything is kind of driving towards that end so that there are none of these kind of pauses almost, because that's what that is. It's a digression into another whole mythology, which is then picked up later in other films. But yeah, so that's why that was cut out, I think.
It's really fascinating to me because, as I said, I saw these in my mid-teens, I would say. I say these when I mean Terminator 2 and Alien, because of the female kind of heroes in both of them. And I'd never even considered that Dallas would come back and save her. So when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, because I'm watching all these films currently from 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and the women are utterly useless in all of them. But there's always a man there to come and save them. So when I read that, I was like, that's really turning things around on its head from the kind of history that we've had before.
And also, it's also this sense of an Agatha Christie plot, because as they get killed off one by one, the whole trick of Agatha Christie is that actually one of them hasn't been killed, and you're supposed to be able to kind of detect which one it is. So I think he's playing with the kind of Agatha Christie expectations of the slow kind of kill off. But again, we've lost that sort of sense of its novelty, I think, because it's now so part of our DNA.
Interesting.
Let's talk a little bit about the xenomorph and the monster, which has become such a piece of iconic. Can I say the word iconography in our world, and about Giger and his art. And Jason, I'm sure, like you, just even the texture or the color of an alien appearing in anything. I remember in one of the Predator movies, there was an alien skull on the back of a ship, and we all were like, oh my, it's such an embedded piece. What have you looked at or thought about in terms of the life cycle of the xenomorph? Because it was a really unique invention in terms of science fiction of the time, wasn't it?
Many things we say, about the xenomorph itself. I mean, I think, first of all, just the horror aspect of not showing the monster too soon, right?
Good horror filmmaking, right?
Exactly. Yeah, just classic, straight textbook, but so necessary, so impactful. So that when you do see the monster in all of its horrific glory, it's that much more impactful. Also, just part of Giger's genius, and again, it was mentioned. A lot of the design work, including even the shape of the head of the xenomorph, comes from early drawings of the Harkonnen, palace for Jodorowsky's Dune that Giger had done, right? And so, again, we're very lucky that Jodorowsky never got to make that film. In some ways, it might have been a fantastically brilliant film. It might not have.
It's sort of like a dandelion. It sort of spawned all of these little seeds that floated out all over science fiction and other films. I think you're right. I think we're lucky that it didn't get made.
But I think also, fantastic about the xenomorph is what its life cycle is, how it reproduces. The fact that it is, in a sense, parasitic on other life forms, right? From the face hugger having to, inseminate, to then using people, and then that final image in the director's cut of Dallas, and also Brett, being consumed to make new eggs. And so then you go back to the original ship, right? And you realize, oh, that's what happened to the crew of that ship. They were basically consumed, because that's how you get all the eggs on that ship. So, that's horrific as well, right? This whole notion of being eaten and eaten alive and consumed, and your body being used, right? That's that's why we consider and view sexual violation as something so horrific, and not just a violation of one's body, but one's soul, one's very being. And when one's body's being infiltrated and used, and of course we have all this various imagery. I'm sure we'll kind of talk about some of this, but the mix of horror and sex, right? So there's sex throughout this, even with the deletion of that scene. Oh, it was filmed and then never included, right, in any of the versions. So in one sense, you have this desexualization of the characters, but there's still sex throughout, and that's just primal. It just speaks to something in our lizard brain responses, so to speak. And I think that just adds to the horror of how the xenomorph acts.
And I think something else that's also primal is the fact that it has no eyes. And one of the ways that we as a mammalian species detect threat is by looking at faces and eyes and identifying the emotional state or the intent of another organism. That's one of the things that kind of freaks people out about snakes and lizards and stuff like that, is there's no eye muscles, so we can't tell what the creature is feeling or thinking. And Roger, the xenomorph, has no eyes. It has no empathy. It is a perfect being, right? As Ash says. So all the more terrifying. I don't know what you can illuminate for us a little bit about how Giger reached into this and what he was pulling from, and how that then was folded in and developed into what we know now as the xenomorph.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fantastic. The life cycle is so important that it's utterly incoherent, I think. And it's partly because it's just this composite of lots of different designers, actually, because, I mean, Giger, of course, did the adult kind of version of this kind of creature. But he confessed he couldn't do the kind of chest burster. He had a version of that, but he said famously it was like a plucked chicken. And that it just was not at all frightening. So they brought in Roger Dickon, a different designer, to kind of design that. And then another special effects guy who'd been working on Star Wars came in and did those famous Jaws, Jaws within Jaws, that kind of animation, all of that element. So it's lots of people coming together. But Giger's kind of central idea, I think, as soon as Dan O'Bannon showed Ridley Scott the painting by Giger, Necronomicon 4, I think it is. He just said, that's it, and it's it because it's got no eyes, and therefore it can't kind of return the gaze. So it's absolutely other. You kind of look to the other to assert your selfhood, and this is not going to do that. All it's going to do is kind of annihilate you. And kind of kill you off with utter kind of ruthlessness. And I think the other kind of element of this going in is that it's the idea of the parasitic wasp, actually. So there are these really evil types of wasp that kind of do exactly what the alien does. So inject you with kind of poison, plant eggs, and then the eggs slowly eat the caterpillars from inside until the very last moment when it kind of uses its jaws to kind of eat its way out. And it's that, actually, that Charles Darwin famously wrote in a letter in 1860 saying, I don't believe in God anymore because I've understood the life cycle of a wasp. It's like who would create something like this?
The horror.
So yeah, absolute horror of it. So it's that kind of all of these elements kind of coming in, and you can see this as if you're a Freudian, then you see this is all about sex as misunderstood as a kind of horrifying devouring of the other person. You can see Darwin in it. You can also even see Francis Bacon in it, because I do think there is also the fascination of Francis Bacon, the painter, with open mouths screaming, but he never was able to paint eyes, so he just left the top of the face blank or just kind of fading away. And clearly that extending jaw comes out of a famous 1945 painting by Francis Bacon. So there are so many elements thrown in. And then just one final one, which is that the guy inside the adult xenomorph in that film is a 6'10" tall Nubian. So he's an African actor. And the sort of
Olaji Bodejo. Yeah.
That's right.
Who's since passed away.
That's right. But that sort of sense of the race politics of this as well, being kind of bound up in this monster is so kind of rich and dense and incoherent, really important.
Jason, I think one of the things that was really fascinating for me to, watching this film and watching it multiple times, getting in preparation for all of our crossover activities and with Alien Romulans coming up, was, as a director, Ridley Scott's just brilliant technique of constantly confusing the visual space with the physiology of the monster and the mechanics and the mechanical nature of the ship that we were in. So even in the last scene where Ridley's not Ridley, Sigourney Weaver, when Ripley is hiding in the spacesuit locker, which is directly out of the 1950s movie It, Terror from Outer Space, which is a real source material for Bannon. But she's in there. There are tubes and pipes and things like that are so reminiscent of the alien physiology. I don't know that another director of science fiction at that time had really. I mean, we'd had consistent visual language across things, but that was just a brilliant stroke that Ridley Scott did, was to match the physical environment with the physiology of the alien.
Yeah, no, I agree. It not only allows for that, again, surprise moment, before Ripley runs into the locker where the alien is revealed to be on the escape shuttle, but I think it's more than that, right? It's showing that, the monster, in some sense, is also us, or more specifically, our technology. Think of a couple of philosophers have, come to mind as we've been talking here. So first of all, talking about, again, the lack of eyes with the xenomorph, right? Emmanuel Levinas, a French Jewish philosopher, talks about the face of the other as being the ground of our ability to relate morally to each other. So as Roger mentioned, the alien comes across from our perspective as kind of just a soulless killing being, and almost mechanical in that way, even though it's not. It's a life form and highly intelligent, but it doesn't seem that way to us because we can't engage it face to face. But then also think of Martin Heidegger, 20th century German philosopher, wrote this famous essay called "The Question Concerning Technology," and he talks about how technology has its own impersonal logic that enframes us. And whereas we invent technology with the understanding or the belief that we are the controllers, we control technology, we use technology. In fact, technology comes to control us. I mean, how hard is it to ignore your cell phone when it vibrates, right? It's just, again, the technology, we become at service to it, and we also become a piece of technology ourselves. And again, this goes back to the whole corporate thing, right? With, again, the crew of the Nostromo are just tools in the hands of the company, and the technology, Mother, and of course Ash. I'm sure we'll talk more about Ash soon. Yeah, the technology is what's controlling things here. And even though the alien, the monster, is not itself a technological being, I think the visual chemistry of the ship and the alien is just basically to exemplify this idea that there's monstrosity surrounding this entire crew.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ash is kind of set up as an opposition to the alien. Like we don't know from the start that he's an android, which is one of the, again, spoilers, one of the surprises of the film. But let's talk a bit more about Ash and how he represents a different kind of monster.
Again, kind of like with the xenomorph, Ash is very impersonal, right? Androids typically don't experience emotions. And again, for me personally, watching Alien around the same time, I can't remember the exact age I was when I first saw it, but it's definitely been around the time where I'm also watching Star Trek: The Next Generation. And of course, you have Data, who, again, an unemotional android, but on a quest to become human, who wants to be that, who feels that becoming more human is his perfection. And Ash is the flip side of that. Ash views humans, again, there's this kind of, almost disdain for his fellow crew members throughout. He's kind of, again, annoyed by them throughout everything. So again, is that a true emotion he's feeling or not? Not really sure there. But again, it's just cold, calculated, and he's fulfilling his programming, right? The company has programmed him to fulfill the end of safeguarding the xenomorph because of what it represents, what it could mean for the company as a resource. And so, Ash is attempting to control the xenomorph. In so doing, exerts this control over the crew. And so in a lot of ways, again, going back to Heidegger, the crew has now become the tool of the technology that humans had invented.
Do you think there's something different once we realize he is an android? Because obviously he's a bad guy. You get the feeling quite early on, and then he's up to something. He's acting very suspiciously. And eventually when we find out that he's not a human, what kind of messaging do you think that gives us?
I think the main message to me is just the notion that, just like with the xenomorph, you can't relate to this being. You can't negotiate with them. You can't get them to feel compassion for you. Even before we know that Ash is an android, he's always acting sort of as at a distance from the rest of the crew. And it's kind of just emotionally unplugged, which, of course, there's a lot of humans that can be that way. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Emotional connection is something that is difficult for a lot of people. It doesn't make one, a morally bad person at all. But the thing with Ash is that even though he does have a face and does have eyes, his eyes they're kind of cold, right? You can't relate to him. And that's, part of what makes even relating to each other, human qua human, sometimes difficult.
Jason, I'm curious, you study a little bit of ethics, and in this allied field, the nature of not only Mother, which has a whole weird psychosexual kind of thing, and the remote control, but then also with Ash, this is AI in the workplace, and something that is sending cultural shockwaves across the globe right now is these large language models that we have. I don't think we're close to artificial general intelligence at this point, but LLMs are certainly here and present, and they're suddenly popping up in our apps everywhere and everything. Can you talk a little bit about the ethics of AI in a workplace environment, and then what's that like? Because this may or may not have been in the director's cut, I can't remember, but there's a scene where Ripley confronts Dallas and says, "Do you know Ash?" And he says, "Well, the company swapped him out 2 days before we flew out." So the company knew and had already set this all up. Something around the ethics there of how suddenly having AI in your workplace that is unbeknownst to you, and it's controlling you. And like you said with the Heidegger thing, we are the tool, or we are the tool of the technology.
Yeah, so many roads we could go down here, but a few things. First of all, one of the biggest fears with AI is that it is going to lead to job loss, right? And so going back to the original point of, when this film came out, and concerns about labor relations and so on, the whole notion that people can become replaced by AIs. And the sort of way when ChatGPT 4 came on the scene, that kind of made everyone very conscious about the presence of AI. But AI was already very much operative, especially in social media algorithms and so on. And it was just more subtle. It was kind of hidden. And so kind of in the same way that Ash, they didn't know he was an android. But one thing that's interesting, with respect to the film, again, every time you rewatch a film, new things jump out at you. One of the things that jumped out at me while I was rewatching Alien the other night was the fact that although they're surprised that Ash is an android, they're not surprised about the existence of androids, right? It's almost like, oh yeah, we know these things exist, we know they're around, and sometimes they even look like people, and they know how to reactivate them. So it's not a shock, like, oh my God, what is this thing? It's just that, we didn't know Ash was an android. So anyways, going back to the larger point, I think that, in terms of the ethics of AI, and in terms of Ash himself being a malevolent character, there's an expression you often hear in the context of AI ethics and AI programming: garbage in, garbage out. AIs reflect us. I remember some years back, Twitter experimented with an AI Twitter avatar. I'm blanking the name was. It was cast as feminine, and it was shut down in less than a day because she became basically super racist, neo-Nazi, like because she's just reflecting back what is in Twitter, right? So I think I think the interesting thing about reflecting on AI is how much AI reflects us. And if we don't like what AI is doing, we need to turn the gaze back onto ourselves.
It's the old cliche again, isn't it? That the real monster is us all along. It's done quite well in that way. Can I talk a bit about the scene, which is really disturbing? I mean, there's all kinds of disturbing things in Alien. And we've kind of skimmed over a lot of the kind of sexual stuff. But the scene where Ash tries to orally rape Ripley with a magazine. Now, if he's an android and he's controlled by the company, Roger, what's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really interested listening to Jason, because what strikes me is that the whole of the franchise really is a kind of a checking in on where we are with thinking about AI. Because, Alien is not about the word AI, probably not really kind of around very much. And we're thinking about this as an android, as a robot. And therefore, I think for a lot of the time, for the film, before he's an android, he looks like a kind of just one of those really, dutiful, I do everything that the managers say, I know all of the rules off by heart, I'm going to kind of, be completely conformist, until he starts breaking the rules himself. And then you start sort of kind of suspecting what's going on. And I think the identification of Ash in that act of, as you say, kind of oral rape with what the facehugger does is a kind of sense of shifting where he's located in terms of this spectrum of beings that we've got between biological, human, and mechanical mother at the other end. So he's kind of, that's a really key moment where he shifts place, and actually he is on the side of the alien. And then, the rest of the series is kind of very, very ambivalent about what to do with these kinds of partially autonomous androids. They become Bishop becomes very sympathetic in the end, although we don't trust him for a lot of the film in Aliens. And then it shifts again with Prometheus and the character of David, who's been given a little bit more autonomy, a little bit to become a little bit more human, but then only uses that to kind of advance a malicious agenda again. And then we have two versions of that android in Covenant. So where do we locate our kind of sympathies? And it seems to me it's a series that tracks our ambivalence about this emergent technology. That might be why it's also so powerful as a kind of cultural marker of how we feel about these issues.
And I read something in the wonderful book that you wrote about the decapitated head and the kind of history of heads speaking the truth. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do love this moment. Not only did they say, oh, he's an android, you can also say, oh, we can plug his head back in and ask him some questions. Yeah, as if that's going to work. So the idea of the kind of severed head or the mechanical device of a head that speaks the truth goes back to kind of Greek myth. And there are lots of kind of myths around certain scientists, men of science, alchemists who worked endlessly on their, like Roger Bacon in the Elizabethan period. These are kind of automata that nevertheless can speak the truth. So this idea of Ash's head being plugged in, again, it's he's called Ash as well, which is this kind of mythological resonant name that takes us back to. It's the ash tree that holds up the world in Nordic belief systems. So this sort of idea of him being kind of connected back into a whole sort of resonant set of mythic tropes, it's such a kind of rich text that Ridley Scott puts together for us to kind of investigate. So yeah, the idea of the severed head is something that is very iconic in literature and culture.
Interesting. And he is a representation of the company, which is, I think, a huge part of the Alien franchise. And it's one of those parts that I actually really love. I really like when they kind of play up the whole company part. What kind of, like, it's a very old kind of sci-fi trope, is kind of the anti-authoritarian ism. And even in like Star Wars, the space opera, they're, rebelling. Can you talk a little bit more about why that company features and what it's trying to, is there a kind of overlying moral that they're trying to explain? Jason.
I don't know in terms of the intentionality of the filmmakers, but I do think that, again, the sort of depersonalization, the reduction of human beings to disposable instruments, and I think it resonates, again, even more so, as I said earlier, as we are dealing with multinational corporations operating in a global economy, where ultimately, and goes back to the beginning of the industrial age, you're always trying to get the cheapest labor possible, and why we've had institutional slavery and so on throughout human history. And so once Henry Ford, right, creates the assembly line, and you've gone from artisans producing things, and again, as John Locke famously put it, mixing their being, with their hands into the earth, and that's how you make something properly your own. Now everything's owned by another, and you're just fulfilling one part, usually doing a very monotonous, again, boring thing. Going back to Dark Star, right? You just bored people out in space, doing the same thing over and over. Even Star Trek, there's a great skit from in Living Color in the 90s, spoofing Star Trek, about how Uhura's just pushing buttons all day, and Sulu's just, I'm tired of just, driving the ship around. I never get to go down to the planets, and you get all the women, Captain, and all this, right? So again, this whole idea that, how do we make, because again, in Alien, they're not exploring space. They're not going off to the final frontier. Space is just their backyard, right? There's no fascination with going to this alien planet, right? And finding this ship. Again, Kane is exhibiting curiosity.
Wait,
of course,
can I just emphasize that point really quick, Jerry? Sorry to jump in, but when they discover the ship and they discover the engineer, and when they're dealing with the face hugger and then the creature, they are never blown away by it. They're like, oh, isn't this interesting? Oh, isn't that weird? Ash even says, well, geez, Ripley, we've never seen this thing before, but he says it so mundanely. So I just wanted to emphasize the point that they are expecting to discover stuff in this world, even though they necessarily haven't.
And it's interesting because you mentioned Kane, and Kane's the only one who seems to have that kind of old school heroic thing. Like, he wants to go, he wants to be the first to go and explore. He wants to find out, curiosity killed it didn't kill the cat, but it definitely killed the Kane.
Yeah. So, and again, this all speaks to the fact, and maybe this is some of the critics back then had an issue with, is that it is not a character-driven film, right? It's a plot-driven film, and the characters, in a lot of ways, are almost incidental. Although, what I'll say as a fan of the film is, I think the actors do a brilliant job of imbuing color and personality. Harry Dean Stanton's one of my most favorite actors on the planet. He's deceased now, but and he brings such subtlety to every role he does. I mean, Paris, Texas, right? I mean, my God, a film with very little dialogue, and yet he brings so much to that. But and so I feel the same thing here with Brett. But anyways, going back to the company again, it's kind of it's the people are supposed to be bland and tools, and again, just worker bees basically. And so it's kind of befits that they're sort of not reacting in a way we would react if we were exploring this. But I think that is part of the messaging of the film, intended or not. At least is how I'm receiving it.
Yeah, and then I just add that in terms of the 1979 film, I mean, they're on a ship called Nostromo, and that is, reference to Joseph Conrad, a novel about mining in Latin America and this kind of colonial exploitation. But it also, Ridley Scott was interested at this time in doing an adaptation of The Heart of Darkness. It's just that Apocalypse Now beat him to it, so he couldn't do that. But the company is the name that you get in the Belgian Congo in Heart of Darkness. And the company murdered 4 to 7 million people whilst expropriating, rubber and so on from the slave plantations that were set up in the Belgian Congo. So you feel that there's kind of resonances here with a company that is absolutely literally a slave driver, and it does not care about the kind of life of its expendable, as they're called, staff. And so there's something, really dark behind the first film. And then again, when you get to Aliens, it's much more of a kind of corporate greed, overtly corporate greed. And, greed is good. It's almost like Gordon Gekko in Space, isn't it? With that sort of sense of the open kind of capitalist greed that's behind that. And the Wayland Corporation continues all the way through the series, again, picking up different resonances at different periods of time and becoming an echo chamber for our culture, I think.
So we have to talk about the cat. There's just no way around it.
The curiosity did not kill. And neither did the alien.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things. I rewatched over the last couple of days, kind of split it over, and I was watching that last night where the alien regards the cat, or earlier on, the cat regards the alien as it kills Brett. Roger, do you have any insight into what the cat represents? Why did Ayehsa? What do you got?
I just want to say Roger definitely has some thoughts on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing, because it's such an inscrutable part of the film and the plot, but yet I think if somebody were to go do a cut and take the cat out, I mean, it's hard to know because I know what I know, but would the film be diminished without the cat? And I kind of have to come down on the side to say that there would be.
And there's
there would
3
be something
species
missing
on the ship as well. So we need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love the detail that on the first day that Sigourney Weaver encountered that cat, she had a horrific allergic reaction to it. And she went to her trailer and burst into tears because she thought she was going to be fired because the cat was more important. They had 4 identical cats. Now, actually, that tells you something about the importance of the cat. So how about Alien is actually about the cat surviving and manipulating all of the humans around it? That cat kills Brett very, very clearly. It leads him into a place where he's going to get done by the alien. And then also puts Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley at completely ridiculous risk for most of the last half hour in order to rescue this damn cat. Who survives at the end? Well, it's Ripley, but also the cat. And the cat is the one who makes the sensible decision at the beginning of Aliens. I'm not going back there. All you humans can if you like, but I'm staying here. And that sort of sense of the cat being really crucial. I mean, I've got all of this from the absolutely wonderful kind of writer and critic, Anne Bilson, who has this thing about cats in film. And she wrote a brilliant point of view kind of version of Alien from the point of view of the cat. So My Day by Jones. And that sense of what are these can openers, as this cat calls humans, what are these can openers doing? You know, it's like they're completely irrelevant. So there's kind of a comic element of that. But also, I think, for me, the relationship between humans and cats is symbiotic, and it's a cross-species kind of symbiosis. Whereas the alien is this utter kind of, Darwinian struggle other that you must exterminate and so on. So there are models of how humans might relate to other kind of species in here. And that's a kind of social interspecies connection that you get between humans and cats. The people who make Alien franchise don't like dogs because the dog is the one that releases the alien in Alien 3. There's the dogs that carry the aliens, never the cats. So they're cat people. So that sort of sense of investigating, again, it's another part of the spectrum of being that's on Nostromo. It's really interesting, all the way from humans, cats, AI, all the way up to this absolute other kind of monster.
And Jason, if we take the cat as a backdrop to help examine our humanity, I don't think in science fiction anything like that has been done necessarily either, to really have something that in that way that offsets our humanity. I don't know. I'm racking my brain right now to think of where we might have seen that before. I know O'Bannon wanted to use the beach ball out of Dark Star for something, as a seed of something, and obviously it became something else. But I'm just trying to think, in the rest of science fiction, do we have that kind of relationship with another species that helps to offset who we are in the face of this threat? Or even just the fact that there's so much mundane stuff in this ship, the little drinky bird things, pens and notepads and what kind of stuff. What else would bored truckers in space have but a cat? So I don't know. I can't think of anything anywhere else in sci-fi where we've seen anything just like that.
Yeah, I can't either. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the other example where even have domesticated animals, and the only one I can come up with is Jonathan Archer's Beagle in Star Trek Enterprise.
Right.
Which
I mean, Data had Spot, so
that's right. Data had Spot. That's true, right?
But that's well down the line. So
yeah,
I think I get the feeling Ann Bilson will probably have a whole list of cats for you,
Definitely.
because I checked her out, and she will know the full list of cats. I'll try and add those in the show notes. But yeah, it is an interesting choice.
But then going back to Joseph Conrad really quick, and with the Nostromo and the Sulaco and the Narcissus, like all of those names of ships all pulled from Conrad, I suppose that would have been a very common thing to have a ship's cat from that. So and as I understand it, Ridley Scott was a big fan of Conrad, and so it infuses a lot of stuff. Even the movie Duelist has a bunch of Conrad influences in it. So from that standpoint, having a ship's cat doesn't seem to be out of the ordinary for this construction.
Well, and especially because it does harken back to sailing ships.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Cats to catch the mice and so on.
So
yeah. The one thing Jones adds a tremendous amount of environmental color, let's say. But I think
that's a good way to put it.
As a character, I think also what Jones represents is that notion of a being that operates on instinct. Recent studies have shown that domesticated cats are closer to their feral cousins than domesticated canines are. And so I think that's the fact that it's a cat is also telling in that sense. So you have this kind of, yes, Jones is domesticated, but again, more feral, more instinct driven. You have the alien, which seems to be that way, but is also clearly a much more intelligent being. And then the humans we're kind of in the middle, and how the humans are operating, based on vice or cowardice or a type of courage that, again, has to sort of well up, right? To do the courageous act, right? It's maybe not the most natural thing to do, or the curiosity, right, that Kane shows. And so I think it's a reflection of humans that, we're kind of, yes, we're intelligent creatures and we're capable of becoming, an alpha species, but we're also, in certain contexts, whether that's a good or bad thing, we're also like cats. We're on the same evolutionary spectrum we're very instinctively driven as creatures as well.
It is interesting because cats can be, as you said, extremely feral. My cat once brought home 4 baby birds, and it was really, really disturbing for me. So they can be really vicious, and apparently they're responsible for all kinds of creatures becoming extinct. So yeah, it's interesting that we kind of go, oh, isn't it cute? And the way you anthropomorphize a cat, you're not going to do that to the alien. Like they both have these very, very, as you've said, these fierce kind of instincts. But we like cats. They're cute. They have eyes. We can put our feelings of cuteness and human emotions and feelings on them. But you can't do that with a xenomorph.
And I believe it's the wisdom we're sort of receiving now from what Jason mentioned is the fact that cats chose us. We didn't choose them. Right. We didn't domesticate them like we did dogs or other animals, but they decided to hang out with us. And so there's that borderline relationship.
Every cat owner knows that, right? Which is they'll put up with you for a bit, and but you're largely a kind of side issue, really. Yeah, and I do think if you watch that film again, the kind of indifferent eyes of Jones as Brett is killed, we do get a kind of close up of this just indifferent face watching the human being killed, and then the alien does nudge the cat's box, and again that's another kind of plant about, is this going to be the place where the alien kind of returns in the last scene? Is this going to be the last kind of twist? So there's a sort of sense in which the cat is being brought close, possibly, to the alien, but also close to allow humans to express emotion and affection and so on. So it's a nice cusp animal between both symbiosis with human beings, but also an absolute indifference to their fate, which is what you see in Jonesy.
Very interesting.
Hey, just a really quick. I'm just curious. Is anybody on this podcast a fan of the Red Dwarf series? Because they definitely play with the cat.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yeah,
because there's the cat.
absolutely, crucial.
Before we leave the cat and move on to kind of rounding things off, there's a very famous meme that I just wanted to read out, which is apparently a review that someone left for Alien, which is Alien is a movie where nobody listens to the smart woman, and then they all die except for the smart woman and her cat. 4 stars. I'm sure you've seen this about. I'll add it in I'll add it on Instagram. But
all of the memes on Twitter in the last couple of weeks of all of these mad cat ladies. It's fantastic because you just get lots of powerful shots of Ripley. It's brilliant.
Okay, so you're very good at coming up with philosophies, aren't you, Jason? So do you have a philosophy for the Alien?
A philosophy for the Alien.
No, I mean the film. What is
for the
philosophy
film.
of Alien 1979?
Yeah. I would say, so first of all, I will make a plug for a book that I was not involved in, so it's not a self-promoting plug, but there is a book called Alien and Philosophy. I infest, therefore I am. And a collection of essays exploring various philosophical themes throughout the Alien franchise. For me personally, just thinking about the first film, I do think it's sort of a cautionary tale of humans just sort of blindly trying to, manipulate our environment. Again, we made a lot of comparisons to Star Trek, right? Of course, Star Trek has this prime directive of non-interference with, alien cultures, which, of course, they break all the time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a TV show. And same thing here, right? In order to get a movie, you have to have Kane, just the fact that the company sends them to find the ship and Kane's walking around exploring, like they're just very careless. And there's this sort of sense of, well, we're humans. We're fine. We got technology. We can control the situation, as opposed to realizing, no, maybe you're being controlled and manipulated. And yes, we think about AIs, we think about social media algorithms, and the way the technology can again frame us and exhibit control over us. But also recognize that, we kind of allow ourselves to be that in our own hubris. So again, classical Greek theme, right? Narcissus, hubris, so on. Maybe that'll be the name of the next ship after Romulus. We'll have the hubris ship.
Brilliant. Roger, do you think there's an overarching message for the film?
That's pretty good what Jason was saying there. I think this sort of sense of that word enframing coming from Heidegger all the way from the set, where Ridley Scott said, you never see ceilings in science fiction films, so I put in lots of low ceilings. And that sort of sense of they're all cramped inside a very kind of confined technological space. So there is something, I think, that it's playing on around that idea of technological kind of, hubris or this Promethean idea, I suppose, of you are toying with forces that actually you don't comprehend, and you need to understand humans' place in a spectrum of beings.
Wonderful. I just wanted to add for anyone who, and I don't know if the people listening who don't know what the prime directive is, because most science fiction fans do, but it's the idea that you do not go and interfere in a planet, either for its environment or with the people, unless they are ready to, for space travel and stuff like that. So just wanted to add that in there. Okay, so at the end of the show, what I like to ask is there anything you can recommend for the listeners that they can pair with the Alien? Jason?
Well, the main thing is, the book I just recommended, the Alien and Philosophy book. There's tons of philosophy that, again, we've talked a little bit about Levinas, talked a little about Heidegger. I think definitely Heidegger's essay, The Question Concerning Technology, if you're, kind of scared of reading, German continental philosophy, that's a very accessible Heideggerian essay. It's not like a big book like Being in Time. But yeah, if you pick up Alien and Philosophy, then it's great because it's a collection of essays. So you can just kind of read whichever ones you think might be of interest. You don't have to read it cover to cover, and the authors of those essays will lead you to some of the deeper first person philosophical explorations that again great sci-fi reflects back onto us. And I think as we've been talking about today, Alien, that's why we're talking about it, so many decades later, and why there's still films coming out. It says something to us about us. And that's, part of what we find it interesting, as well as just being a great horror flick.
Brilliant. Roger.
Well, I'd recommend a short story by Octavia Butler, the African-American science fiction writer, called Bloodchild, which she wrote about 5 years after Alien came out. And it's a rewrite of Alien, basically. But this time, the humans and the aliens, they do implant the humans and they do screech their way out of bodies. But that's understood. And it's a symbiotic and loving relationship that's developed between these species. And it's, the aliens are very kind of delighted and very, supportive of the humans who are willing to submit to this kind of process. And it becomes a very loving kind of connection. And I think what that points towards is a kind of different potential understanding of relationship between self and other, or between human and alien, which is, it doesn't have to be one of utter all-out war, but can be symbiotic. And I think there's lots of science fiction and lots of horror that are exploring that idea, as opposed to the really cruel Darwinian struggle for existence that's in Alien 79. So I'd recommend that as a rewrite.
Wonderful.
Sorry, I'll just add, I think that's a very important message as we think about our relationship to other species, to our natural environment.
Great, thank you. David, we're co-hosting, but would you like to recommend something for the listeners?
I absolutely do have things. So I've got multiple tabs open on my browsers already for the Heidegger article, the Living Color spoof, My Day by Jones the Cat, and of course, Bloodchild. So thank you for those. I would recommend 3 films. I would recommend It, Terror from Beyond Space.
I absolutely love that, which is something you recommended to me. It was so much fun.
It was. It's a lot of fun. It's very of its time period. But if you're interested in the roots of this film, you can really see it. Everything down to the compartment ladders that change decks, to the whole idea of blow it out of the airlock. It was a primary source for Dan O'Bannon. The next thing I would say is Ridley Scott's first directorial feature film, which is The Duelist. And if you want to see the DNA that Ridley was coming, DNA is not the right, with the learned cinematography that Ridley Scott had, because he had made thousands of TV commercials prior to this. And so he made The Duelist off of his own sweat. Nobody was knocking on his door. So he's like, I'm going to make a movie. So he makes The Duelist. Watch that for the cinematography, because you can really see the roots of Alien in the visual language that he uses, which is so important to the storytelling of Alien, is how he uses the camera as much as what he puts in front of the camera. And then for the third thing, I would definitely recommend Dark Star, which is an absolute crazy 70s hoot of a film. It has a very different sensibility. So I would say not be careful when you watch it. Just go in knowing what you're watching. You're not watching something that is a modern sensibility, but something very much a student film shot by Carpenter, written and acted in by O'Bannon. And it is a very funny film if you can see the humor in it. But it really does, as Roger was saying earlier, that these are, what do human beings do when they're bored in space?
And I have one more recommendation that, again, something we've referenced, but just in case people aren't aware, the documentary about Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yeah. Yes. I was going to
influence.
Yeah. That's a great film. That's a really great film.
I really want the book. I really want the book that they made for Yoda for that.
Which apparently there's only like 5 in existence or something.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
I believe somebody's bought the rights, and I don't know. There's some haggling or negotiation concurrently right now that maybe somebody's trying to get it produced because somebody other than the previous rights owner owns it now. So
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for coming on, guys.
Thank you. That's been great.
Thank you for having us. I gotta go Roger's book now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, Roger. I didn't think I'd enjoy it that much. I like the fact you've got little funny bits in there as well. So maybe a serious academic, Roger. That's it for this episode. Next episode, I will be speaking to 2 wonderful guests about a lost pioneer of 19th century science fiction literature, Robert Duncan Milne. We will find out why his work slipped through the cracks of history and San Francisco. And David, what are you and the Lorehounds up to?
Well, we're going to be doing a review of the new Alien Romulus movie about a week after it releases. So look for that coverage, as well as our coverage of the 45th anniversary of the film Alien, which is sort of a companion to this podcast. Otherwise, we're just rolling off our weekly coverage of The Acolyte and of House of the Dragon Season 2. But we're about to start up coverage of Season 2 of The Rings of Power. And then later in the fall, we're going to be covering Agatha All Along, as well as Dune Prophecy. You can visit us on our website, thelorehounds.com, and you can join us on our Discord server. We've got a great community of human beings where you can talk and hang out and nerd out about all the shows and the movies and books that you love. We've got a great mod team. It's a really supportive and fun community. Ayehsa, you're there as well, so I'd invite you to check us out there.
Absolutely. And you can find out more about me and the podcast at everyscififilm.com. And please do remember to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have time, a rating or a review really helps out both me and David. Thank you.
The Lorehounds podcast is produced and published by The Lorehounds. You can send questions and feedback and voicemails at thelorehounds.com/contact. Get early and ad-free access to all Lorehounds podcasts at patreon.com/thelorehounds. Any opinions stated are ours personally and do not reflect the opinion of or belong to any employers or other entities. Thanks for listening.